The first time I saw them together, I stopped walking and stood at the fence for a long time. It was my 6th day at the sanctuary. I was doing a morning check of the eastern enclosure, routine, first perimeter pass after sunrise, when I came around the corner of the sleeping area wall and saw something that made no sense. Kato was maybe 12 weeks old. He was the size of a house cat pressed into the left side of Nkosi, a 14-year-old gorilla who outweighed him by close to 300 pounds, with his eyes closed and his chin resting on her thigh. 2 gorilla babies were climbing across his back as if he were furniture, a bridge between her arm and the ground. Her hand was resting on his flank. He was asleep. She was watching the tree line. I stood there for a long time. I did not understand what I was looking at. I also understood it completely. That image is the one I come back to when I try to explain how any of what happened later was possible. The cub tucked into her side, the gorilla babies using him as a path between her knee and the earth, her hand sitting still on his back the way you rest a hand on something you have decided to keep. I stood at that fence for probably 6 or 7 minutes. No one came to find me. When I finally walked on and finished the check and filed my morning notes, I wrote down what I had observed in the factual language the reports required. Then I read it back, and it did not sound like anything that had actually happened. I crossed it out and started again. This was southwestern Uganda, a private sanctuary of about 400 acres sitting at the edge of a national park corridor. The dry season had been long. Dust was in everything, in your boots, in the creases of your hands, in the back of your throat by mid-morning. At night, the temperature dropped fast, and sounds from the park carried across the fence in a way they did not during the day. Kato had come to us 3 weeks before I arrived. His mother had been shot near a snare line at dawn by a bushmeat crew that panicked when she approached them. Not hunters, not deliberate. A frightened man with a gun who did the worst possible thing in a single bad second and then ran. The cub had followed the sanctuary fence for 2 days before Nkosi found him on the inside of the wire. No one could explain how he got through and simply took him in. The way she had seen it done with her own infants. The way she understood that small and alone meant yours now. I watched them every day after that. I watched Kato learn to knuckle walk by watching the gorilla babies do it. Getting the motion almost right and then wrong, almost right and then wrong, with an expression I can only describe as personally offended. I watched Nkosi clean his ears with the same focused attention she gave her own young. I watched her press her forehead gently against his when he was restless, and I watched him go still under that contact, completely, all at once, the way an animal goes still when it has found where it belongs. I watched her babies treat him as a permanent feature of their world, climbing him, sleeping against him, grooming him with the bored thoroughness you give to something that has always been there. And I watched Kato go silent sometimes in a way the gorilla babies never did. He would be playing, or eating, or pressed into Nkosi's side, and something outside the fence would pull his attention and he would just stop. Ears forward, eyes on the tree line, every part of him listening to something I could not hear. He never made a sound before those moments. He just went quiet. And then something happened, or did not, and he came back to himself. There was one evening in the 6th month, the light going orange and flat the way it does here at the end of the dry season, when I sat at the eastern fence for almost an hour, watching the 3 of them do nothing in particular. Nkosi was grooming one of her infants. The other infant was asleep against Kato's back. Kato was lying with his chin on the ground, eyes half closed, his tail moving very slowly. I remember thinking that if you did not know any better, if you had no information about what any of these animals were supposed to be, you would look at the 4 of them and see one thing: a family at rest. I wrote that in my personal notes that night, not in the official report, in my own notebook, in my own words. It was the most lion thing about him, and it was the thing I forgot about in the months that followed, until the night it mattered. The Wildlife Authority issued the transfer order in the 8th month. The reasoning was sound. A sub-adult male lion in a gorilla enclosure is a risk that compounds every week, and the legal framework for mixed species contact at private sanctuaries had been tightening for 2 years. I read the order twice. I could not find anything in it that was wrong. I still could not make myself agree with it. They took him on a Tuesday morning, and Nkosi stayed in the far corner of the enclosure, while the transport team worked, with both infants pressed to her chest, watching until the vehicle was out of sight. She searched the enclosure for 2 days afterward. I watched her move through it slowly and without hurrying. The sleeping area, the feeding corner, the stretch of inner fence where Kato used to lie in the late afternoon heat. Her babies followed her from corner to corner. She did not find what she was looking for. On the 3rd day, she stopped searching. She sat in the center of the enclosure with her back straight and her eyes on the eastern fence and did not move for most of the afternoon. 6 weeks after the transfer, I filed a report noting that a sub-adult male lion had been observed ranging the corridor between the park boundary and the eastern fence at night. I logged it as nuisance behavior. I asked for guidance. No response came before the night everything changed. I was on my 2 a.m. perimeter check, 43 nights after the transfer, when I heard Nkosi's alarm bark. If you have never heard that sound up close in the dark, I do not know how to describe it, except to say it does not allow you to stay still. It is not a warning. It is an announcement that something has already gone wrong. I was at the northern end of the fence line when it hit me. I turned and ran south, swinging my flashlight toward the eastern enclosure, and I saw them. 2 men already inside the outer wire, moving fast through the dust toward the sleeping area, and a 3rd man crouched at the fence, with a cutting tool still working through the last section of wire. The beam swept across metal, then faces, then the wall of the sleeping area where Nkosi was pressed against the stone with both her babies gripped to her chest, and her eyes wide and fixed on the men. I had my radio up before I reached the inner fence. I was already calling in when a man came out of the dark on my left side. I felt the radio leave my hand. I heard it hit the ground. I heard it crack under a boot, and then there was nothing in my hand and nothing on the frequency, and no one who knew where I was. I pressed my back against the inner fence, the secondary barrier between me and the main enclosure, and tried to read what was in front of me. The men were moving toward Nkosi. She was not moving. She had both infants behind her and her eyes on the men, and she was doing the thing gorillas do when they are deciding, measuring distance and weight and choosing what kind of thing to be in the next 10 seconds. I was watching her, and I was remembering things I could not stop remembering. Kato learning to knuckle walk, the particular way he would settle against her side and let his whole body go loose. The low sound I used to make sitting at this fence during feeding, slow, carried, nothing is wrong, and the way he would lift his head when he heard it, and then put it back down again, satisfied. The men were 10 meters from Nkosi. I made the sound. It came up out of me before I decided to make it. Not thought, just body, just 3 years of the same fence and the same time of day. Low and slow and carried across the dark. Nkosi heard it from across the enclosure. She put both infants down behind her. She straightened to her full height. And she was tall, standing, taller than you expect, 110 kilograms of gorilla rising in the dark with her hands coming off the earth. She began to move toward the men, not charging, not vocalizing, just crossing the ground steadily, with her hands and her full attention, moving toward the source of the sound the way she always had. The men stopped. I watched them watch her, and I saw the moment they realized they did not know what they were looking at. They had come for something small enough to transport. They had not planned for this. And in the stillness that followed, something outside the eastern fence went completely silent. I had 5 seconds, maybe less. The lead man came for me. He was calm about it, not angry. Calm, the way someone is calm when they have done this before and know how it ends. He had a blade. He put it against my side and told me to open the enclosure gate. He said I had 30 seconds. What he was asking me to understand in those 30 seconds was this: a living young gorilla, delivered to the networks that move live animals through Central and East Africa, is worth more than a year's local wage. No questions asked. Private sanctuaries on national park boundaries are the most exposed targets on the map. High-value animals, no armed rangers, often one keeper on night duty alone. I had known this the way you know about a danger that has not come for you yet. Now, it had come for me. Nkosi was still standing in the center of the enclosure. Her babies were pressed against the back of her legs. She was looking at the blade against my side. I thought about my brother. I had been working double shifts for 3 years to keep him in school. This job was the only financial foundation my family had. I thought about what my death tonight would cost him before I finished thinking about Nkosi. Then I stopped thinking. I reached into my pocket and felt the key, a working key, the only one I had on me. I threw it over the inner fence into the dark interior of the enclosure as far and as hard as I could. It disappeared into the dust somewhere the men could not reach before morning. No one was opening that gate tonight. The man with the blade said something. The 30 seconds ran out. I closed my eyes. The roar came from directly above the eastern wall. In a small space, at close range, a lion's roar does not land as sound. It lands as pressure. Something that happens inside your chest before you have time to understand it as noise. It lasted 3 seconds. It filled every part of the enclosure, and then it was over and the men were already running. I heard them hit the outer fence. I heard the wire flex and snap. I heard boots on dry ground going away fast into the dark. And then there was nothing, just the dust settling. Nkosi standing motionless in the center of the enclosure, the dark on every side. I did not move. I was on the ground with my back against the inner fence, and I was breathing, and I was looking at my own hands in the flashlight beam, and they were shaking in a way I had not noticed until the thing that was making them shake was gone. The dust was still moving through the light. The enclosure was quiet in a way it had not been 5 seconds ago. I sat there. I listened. Then, in the gap between a bent fence post and the eastern wall, 2 eyes. They appeared in my flashlight beam and held there, still, pale gold, completely calm. Kato pushed his face into the gap as far as it would go, his muzzle, his broad, flat forehead, his ears. He was large now, not full-grown, not yet maned, but large enough to fill that gap like something solid and deliberate. He made no sound at all. He looked at Nkosi, then he looked at me. Nkosi crossed the full enclosure. She walked without hurrying, her babies trailing behind her in a single line, and she came to the inner fence directly in front of me and reached through with one open hand. Her fingers found the top of his head. He closed his eyes. She left her hand there, palm open, resting on his forehead. Not stroking, just the weight of it, in the gap between the bent post and the wall, in the dark, in the silence after everything that had wanted to do harm had gone. I made the sound again. Low, slow. Nothing is wrong. Kato's eyes opened and found me in the beam of my flashlight. He was 19 months old. He had covered the distance from wherever he had been in the corridor in the dark, in total silence, right up until silence was the wrong choice. Then he made the one sound that emptied the enclosure of everything that should not have been there. And then he was here, in the gap, with her hand on his head and his eyes on me. He held my gaze for a long time. Then he pulled back from the gap, slowly, and was gone. Nkosi stood at the inner fence for another minute with her hand still extended into the empty dark. Then she lowered it. She turned and walked back to the sleeping area with both infants holding on. I sat with my back against the fence and did not move for a long time. At some point, my hands stopped shaking. The dust settled. The temperature kept dropping the way it does here in the hours before first light, cold coming through the stone into my back, and I sat in it, and I thought about almost nothing. There was not much to think about. What had happened, and it had been seen by no one except me and 2 gorillas and a lion on the wrong side of a fence, and somehow that felt exactly right. At first light, I walked the eastern fence line. The dust along the base of the wall was printed with lion tracks, back and forth, pressed deep and worn soft at the edges. Not from last night. The edges were too smooth, too settled. A path made over many nights, starting long before any of this. The Wildlife Authority was notified that morning. Kato was not recaptured. The path runs about 40 meters along the eastern wall, from the tree line to the gap where the fence post had bent inward. I understood now that it had not bent in a storm. It had bent from something pressing against it from the outside, night after night, at the closest point to the enclosure it used to live in. He had been there the whole time. He just never made a sound until the moment it mattered.